As expected, lobby security was a breeze. Upon reaching 50-plus employees, most firms and companies in Richmond went through the trouble of hiring security guards and installing metal detectors. Once a business reached 50 employees, ugly elements started to pay attention. If it wasn't ripe for robbing, it might be ripe for exploding. The terrorists, gangs, and cults proliferating the area were always in contention for the biggest score in dollars, or body count. Miss Pruden from Human Resources met me in the lobby's elevator bank. "Miss Jacqueline May?" We shook hands. "So pleased to meet you." She pushed the up button. "How's your day been so far?" "Progressing beautifully," I said. We stepped inside the elevator. I scanned all 4 walls, then cast my eyes upward. One obvious camera in the back right corner. I shifted my vision across the electromagnetic spectrum as I scanned the roof. Opening the service hatch would be a piece of cake, but I put it on the list of last resorts. I wasn't about to go scrambling around in an elevator shaft again, not if I could help it. "I hope you don't mind me saying how impressive your resume is, Miss May." "Why would I mind?" I asked. She shrugged. "Well, you're no stranger to law firms. You know that a copy of an interviewee's resume has been given to everyone she's likely to come in contact with." I nodded. "True. But no one's supposed to comment on it except the people with whom you've scheduled interviews." I smiled and nodded again. "I know how the process works. But I just wanted to say how grateful I am for the pro bono work you've done on behalf of abused and sick women, those living in the House of Thomas shelters. People like you are an inspiration." I lost my smile and swallowed. Residents of the HOT shelters, HOT, House of Thomas, were those with incurable diseases. Generally, only virus carriers, those afflicted with other extreme ailments, and liberal do-gooders were sympathetic to the work the shelters performed. My research hadn't led me to conclude anyone in this firm would do anyone any good. The item was only on the resume as some volunteer work Jacqueline May had done fresh out of law school, a time when people were expected to do stuff just because it looked good on a resume, not because they actually believed in what they were doing. Was Pruden a virus carrier, one adept at hiding her condition, or a bleeding heart who'd slipped through the cracks? If she or anyone else here were a virus carrier, a trained one, I'd have to alter my strategy. I looked at her face, looked beneath the skin, x-rayed, magnified, and tried a few other optical tricks as well as I could without seeming blatantly odd. I didn't detect any parasites. She wasn't a carrier, just a bleeding heart. If she crossed my path on my way out, I'd try not to hurt her too badly. "I try to do my best," I said. We stopped on the 10th floor. "You'll be meeting with Miss Shaw first," Prudence said as she led the way past the reception and through the hall. "Then one of the senior associates." "Any partners?" I asked. "Well, it's a little unusual for a first round, but since you have such awesome credentials, maybe Miss Shaw can set something up, depending on schedules. Is there anyone in particular you'd like to try to see?" "I have 1 or 2 in mind." I wasn't about to give anything away and risk losing the element of surprise. "I'll discuss it with Miss Shaw." Surreal artwork covered the walls, all by artists who'd tried hard to one-up or two-up Van Gogh. Spectacular. They were vibrant enough for me to use to my advantage if I needed any extra help escaping. None of the offices I passed had doors, and half were empty. No surprise. The recession had been tough on almost everyone, including this once mighty firm that in my day had filled all 13 of its floors. But they weren't hurting that badly. Varman and his department were full of black rainmakers. They were still bringing in the dollars just fine. Shaw was a frumpy but seemingly affable woman in her mid to late 40s. I was expecting someone taller, leggier, more angular, and wearing just the right skirt and blouse to show off all the goods. Firms of this type usually put women of that sort in the HR and recruitment departments, putting up a good front to attract the right sort of hires. In fact, I would have been willing to bet women of that kind were to be found aplenty among this firm's recruiters, but they probably only met with the male prospects. We exchanged introductions and shook hands. When invited, I sat in the chair in front of her desk and handed her a copy of my resume. Of course, she'd already read it, but she scanned it again, either to refresh her memory or to be polite. Before she could ask her first question, I reached back into my case and said, "Each of my references typed out a brief letter of recommendation. The letters include contact information for follow-up discussions." I handed her one copy of all 5, all originally signed, though not by the people whose names were at the top. Bruce wasn't quite a master forger, but he was good enough. "Impressive," Shaw said. "Most people just provide names, titles, and phone numbers for their references." I wanted to go the extra mile. Shaw skimmed the letters, and I skimmed my surroundings. "So," she said, "you want to be an associate with our firm." She looked me up and down, taking in the entire package before her. "You know the recession has been hard on everyone, especially lawyers." Yeah, bullshit time. She asked her questions, and I gave her the answers she wanted to hear, justifying my existence and intentions, highlighting my goals and assets, even elaborating with stories and anecdotes so she didn't think I was some robotic candidate reading from a script. I was the perfect interviewee, even though I kind of was reading from a script, paying less attention to our conversation than to my more immediate task of drilling into her mind. My gaze never left her eyes as we talked. I'd establish contact when answering her first question by subtly lighting the tissue of my irises like a firefly's abdomen. That very sight, coupled with the sound of my voice, was the hook, and with each subsequent question and answer, a fraction of my consciousness drilled deeper and deeper past her eyes and into her mind. I needed to go deep enough so that, when I planted a certain suggestion, I'd set off a psychosomatic reaction, making a mere wish come true. 15 minutes into the interview, I was deep enough. Her breakfast, only partially digested, wasn't sitting well, so I thought, so she thought. The mush wanted out of her. Something in her bowels shifted, making a rumble loud enough for us both to hear. I didn't react when she grimaced. I just kept on answering her question about Jacqueline May's charity work. There was another rumble and another grimace before she said, Miss May, pardon me for interrupting, but if you'll excuse me for 1 second, there's something I must check on." She stood and walked quickly toward the door, her arms pressed to her sides. I didn't have a lot of time. Luckily, I didn't require much. I remained in my chair as I shifted the light around me, creating a thick shell of myself, the appearance of myself, sitting in the chair stiffly, waiting patiently for Shaw to return. Then I stepped out of the illusion, bending the light surrounding my real body, making it invisible to the camera I'd seen in the ceiling and any others I might have missed. Some people can easily divide their attention. They can listen to a speech while reading a book on a wildly different subject and retain everything they've seen and heard. I had been trained to do something similar when it came to manipulating electromagnetic radiation. But as all tricks required physical and mental energy, they are necessarily time-limited. My out-of-body trick would expire in roughly 10 minutes. I took the 2 drives out of my bag and made for Shaw's computer. I inserted the first one into a USB port. Acquired from one of Bruce's contacts, The drive was first-class spy technology. It worked at lightning speed to download specific information from a computer and any other computers attached to it. Firewalls and all other security measures, at least those used by most in the public sector, were of no consequence. All one had to do was plug it in, sit back, and let it extract. In 60 seconds, it was halfway done. But someone was approaching Shaw's office. Pruden. Shit. I couldn't stop now, and I couldn't retake my position in the chair. Pruden entered the office. "Miss May, can I get you anything while you're waiting for Miss Shaw? Coffee? Water?" Throwing my voice was one trick I'd never learned, surprisingly. I was one of the few ex-Sprytes who wasn't a singer, not even a bad one, and I'd left the fold before I could ever learn. So I'd have to do this the dirty way. Maintaining invisibility, I got behind Pruden as she cautiously approached the hologram, no doubt wondering why it wasn't moving or responding to her. I put my right hand firmly over her mouth and placed my left arm across her neck tightly enough so she'd be unable to move as I leaned in and whispered a rhyming, alliterative chant. After 10 seconds, I released her, letting her collapse on the floor, unconscious and invisible. Singing lessons, no, but I had taken the witch's poetry lessons and mastered them. I dragged the invisible woman into a corner so she'd be out of the way when I broke and ran. Then I rushed to the computer, unplugged the first drive, and inserted the second. More top-notch technology, this one would install malware into the firm's system. When I was long gone, it would also leave a message, letting everyone know why Vermont had been targeted, and warning all others of the same filthy ilk. Someone else was approaching the door. Shaw. And the second drive didn't seem to be working. Fuck it. I left the drive where it was and hustled to grab my briefcase and handbag. Shaw entered the office. "I apologize, Miss May, but She turned and saw Pruden's slumped body in the corner. "What?" I'd released the concentration needed to keep Pruden unseen. I needed it for my next trick. I got in front of Shaw and dropped my own veil of invisibility. She whipped her gaze from Pruden to me. I could see it in her eyes. She was ready to release a scream that would be heard halfway down the hall. I grabbed the back of her neck with my left hand as I jammed the heel of my right under her jaw. Shaw instinctively shut her eyes, tight. "Listen carefully," I said, before launching into another chant. This one wouldn't render the woman unconscious or invisible. Quite the opposite. It would leave her calm, awake, and alert enough to respond to any questions with some variant of, "Nothing is wrong, please leave me alone." I felt her body relax. It was working. When her eyes opened, I knew it had worked. I led her to her chair, sat her down comfortably, then retrieved my briefcase and handbag. The hologram of myself was fading. Shaw's trance would last for just 30 minutes, and the trick would only work if potential visitors didn't progress far enough past her doorway to notice Pruden. My first instinct was to make myself invisible again, but I needed to conserve energy. I'd spent enough already without even seeing my target. Plus, with my hologram now dissipated, onlookers might wonder where I'd disappeared to. I nonchalantly walked out of Shaw's office, visible and ready to flash a broad smile at anyone who made eye contact. I'd gone maybe a dozen steps before I had a thought. The ceiling camera in Shaw's office. Surely security had seen me assault Shaw, even if they'd missed me taking out Pruden. Green mistake. I quickened my pace. I always opted for stairs when I could. Elevators were never safe havens, not even temporary ones. Besides, it was easier to fight and deceive one's way through a stairwell. Easier for me, anyway. I located the nearest exit sign and followed it. I pushed through the door, then paused, listening for voices. The stairwell was empty, for the moment. The security guard's office was on the 7th floor. My target was on the 13th. I ran up the stairs, appreciating the symbolism as I moved. May began with the 13th letter, and Jacqueline May had 13 letters. All would work to my advantage. The witch had been clever in seasoning her acolytes with all sorts of magics that relied heavily on the placement of numbers and letters. When I stepped out of the stairwell, I felt I was in the zone. The floor seemed to bounce a little under my feet, as if I were lightly jogging on a resilient running track. And that's how I moved, hustling like an employee running late for a meeting. There were just as many empty offices on this floor as there had been on 10. The people I did see hardly gave me a second look as I moved. Well, many of the men did, but not because they were suspicious. My target was in office 13-8, a corner office. As I approached, I heard Vermon's voice and that of another man's. Both were equally angry about something. There was more than one person, and they were both agitated. That wouldn't be a problem. I could probably blind and choke Vermon's guest out before any— "Can I help you?" I paused, shuddering a little before turning in the direction of the woman's voice. I expected a secretary, but the woman wasn't sitting at one of the nearby stations. She was standing just a few feet behind me and wearing a security guard's uniform. Blonde, close-cropped hair, mid-40s, maybe ex-cop or ex-military. Not in the best shape, but could probably handle herself well enough. I'd been so focused on Vermon's doorway, I didn't even realize someone was focusing on me. Second green mistake. I couldn't afford a third. I have an appointment to meet with Mr. Vermon." "How's that? Do you work here?" She was going to ask for my firm identification card next, so best not to lie. "No, I used to, a long time ago, but I'm interviewing today and I wanted to— "Interviewing? You don't work here? How are you walking the halls without an escort?" With each question, her voice got louder, drawing more attention. She raised her walkie-talkie, which made onlookers pay even sharper attention. There was nothing I could say or do to stun her, not with so many eyes on us. Turning invisible was out of the question, so I gambled on option number 3. "Listen," I said, "please don't say anything. I'm his niece, and I was going to surprise him." The security guard paused. "We haven't seen each other or even spoken in years," I said. "Not since my family lost everything in the typhoon, and he sent us some money to get by. Now that I've finished law school near the top of my class, well, I didn't want to gamble on whether or not I'd get a job here. I may or may not. I just wanted to surprise him, let him know how instrumental his money was in getting me to where I am today." The guard was old enough to be a mother. Whether she was or wasn't, she undoubtedly had some sympathy for family matters. Cops and military types, the female ones, were like that. And even though I wasn't a musician, I sure knew how to play heartstrings. "Okay," she said, "go ahead, but you really should be escorted. I'll wait out here to walk you back when you're finished." I clasped my hands in front of my face and nodded. "Thank you." I turned and continued my approach, aware that the security guard's eyes were trained on me the whole time. There was still a chance she was going to call someone on that walkie-talkie. I had to be quick. Vermon and whoever else was in his office were still engaged in a heated discussion. I wasn't sure what they were talking about, and I didn't much care at this point. I stepped into the doorway. Vermon saw me and stopped mid-argument. "Who the fuck—" His guest, seated in front of his desk, turned and glared. An older man in a suit, in his 50s, undoubtedly another partner. "I apologize for interrupting," I said, "but I just had to see you before I left the building. Uncle." Vermon straightened a little. He'd gotten the reference. Uncle meant one thing to the likes of the security guard, and something entirely different to the likes of Vermon. It was a code word, a damned, dirty, disgusting word that sounded pleasant to the disgusting likes of him. "May I come in?" I asked. Vermon nodded slowly. He got a better look at me under his office lights. His brow unfurrowed and his grimace twisted like a worm to take the shape of a smile. "Hello." If worms could talk, they'd sound like this slime ball. He didn't even have enough charm to evoke a snake. It was just as well. It's so easy to kill slimy things.
Prakul,
the man in the chair said.
who is this woman? We're not finished discussing them.
This is family, I believe, Varman said.
I'm sure you agree family takes precedence over what we were discussing. I'll give you a call, Mark. Please, close the door behind you.
Mark stood and tossed me a nasty glance as he passed. Age notwithstanding, Varman was clearly the senior partner.
What can I do for you, Missy?
I'll tell you what I've told the others before I settled their accounts. I approached deliberately as my eyes drew in light, dimming his office with each step. There is a ring of pimps in the greater Richmond area, malicious abductors who've taken women, girls, and drugged them, kept them high, kept them captive against their will. When arrested, none of these rodents can manage to stay in jail, despite mountains of evidence. They seem to have lawyers on top of lawyers. Varman was too entranced, too frightened, or too confused to move. My research tells me you're one of the ones on top, I said. A sugar uncle. An Uncle Sugar. I got it. I got that twisted joke long ago. A twisted USA, a shadowy government fueled by drugs and prostitution. You're a big part of the judicial branch, the Supreme Court of this shadowy bullshit. But on the surface, in the light, you're just a lawyer keeping big-time pimps and pushers out of jail. Apparently you've been performing all your work for them pro bono. I'm not going to bother asking the why of it all. I don't have time to listen to your greasy lies. A slick computer program will tell me all I need to know about all the slicksters. Varman's smile was a distant memory. I saw it in his eyes. He wasn't sure whether to reach for his phone or yell for help. I made sure he did neither by keeping my glowing eyes locked on his as I dropped my handbag and briefcase.
Who are you?
He spoke in a near whisper.
Really, who are you?
I'm the one who's going to snuff out your shadow. I'm the one who's going to use you as an example that I can get to anyone in your fraudulent government at any time. The injustice system in this area may not care about your kind, for whatever reason, but I do, and I'm going to make your putrid kind extinct. Varman's hand flinched as he drew in a breath, his mouth opening wider. He was going to scream and reach for his phone. I flared my eyes, unleashing every bit of light stolen from the pitch-black office, shoving everything from my eyes into his. He screamed, all right. That security guard would barge in at any moment. I ran, jumped on the desk, grabbed a stapler and swiveled just as she entered. I tossed the stapler to my left, enveloping it in crafted light, making it appear as a parrot. Confused, the guard turned her head, keeping her eyes on the distraction as I tossed a cluster of infrared pellets toward the side of her face. She screamed as she fell, hitting her head in just the right way against the doorframe, knocking herself unconscious. That last bit was luck. I was afraid I'd have to spend a few precious seconds throttling her while whispering poetry into her ear. I turned back toward Varman. He was writhing on the floor behind his desk, grasping at anything within reach. I'd attempted to fry his optic nerves, probably blinding him for life, not that he had much of it left to live anyway. I hopped down, turned him on his back, and sat on his sternum, pinning his arms under my knees. I grasped the top of his head with my fingers and placed my thumbs over his eyelids. He kept screaming, but I made sure he heard me. I've been saving a special poem for you, vermin. I applied pressure with my thumbs as I recited it. In the back of my mind, I knew security was rushing toward the office. Someone may have even called the police. A wannabe hero among the office staff had probably gathered up some courage and a broomstick and was heading this way. Didn't matter at this point. My poem was a short one, carefully composed with elements of Ramon's name, behaviors, and biography. By the time I reached the 6th line, the struggle had left him. When I reached the 8th, his bones were hollow. At the 11th, His skin was thin as rice paper. At the 12th and final line, I twisted my wrists, inserting my thumbs completely, and I heard the hiss. I stood up. There were voices behind me near the doorway. The most prominent one yelled, "Don't move!" I didn't. I didn't even turn to see who'd said it. But Varman moved. And I'm sure whoever was behind me watched his body float upward and turn face down, its arms and legs splayed, its irradiated skin emitting a glow that inspired hopelessness while the mouth gaped, vomiting a putrid stream of blood, liquefied organs, and stuff even a seasoned crime scene specialist would be too repulsed to try to identify. Once the body stuck to the ceiling, unable to ascend any further, I turned to see if anyone was still there, still staring. Only 2 men in suits, possibly senior associates. Both were watching Varman's body, not mine. I could get by them easily, but, hell, why not go out with a little style? I hopped onto the desk, grabbed a tape dispenser and a ceramic cup full of pens, and tossed them. Flying creatures of light and the mummifying corpse on the ceiling had the 2 lawyers looking everywhere but at me. I punched and kicked them as I passed, hitting them both in spots sweet enough to ensure they wouldn't get up and follow me any time soon. I retrieved my handbag and briefcase and stepped outside the office. 2 empty secretarial stations were in front of me. There was a hallway to my left and a hallway to my right. Security guards were coming fast down both of them. They didn't have guns or tasers, but like the sleeping blonde in the office behind me, they appeared to be either ex-cop or ex-military, trained. But trained by mere men, not by a witch. I tossed my bag and briefcase onto one of the secretary's desks, then loosened the cord belt around my waist. My dress went loose as my skin sapped all available light in the vicinity. I didn't gradually dim the lights this time. I zapped them off and made myself appear as an aglow angel in the eyes of these men who surely entertained ideas both sexist and sexual. As expected, they didn't retreat. They pressed on toward me, intending to tackle and do who the hell knew what else. Good, just as long as they kept their eyes on me, particularly on my pretty face, which was now the most prominent part of me. When they were all within 10 feet, I pulled back my hair and directed all the light my skin had gathered toward my ears and into my citrine earrings, where the light strengthened before splaying outward. To say I simply dazzled them wouldn't do me justice, but I meted sufficient justice to the guards. They weren't permanently harmed. They'd wake up in an hour or 2, and the outer layers of skin on their faces would probably heal in a couple of weeks. I retrieved my bags yet again and cut left, toward the stairwell I'd used earlier. 3 or 4 brave but foolish souls stepped out of their offices, either to try to understand the source of commotion or to put a stop to it. I put a stop to whatever notions anyone had when I snapped my belt across their faces. It hadn't been necessary to make the paintings come alive, after all. I barreled through the stairwell door and scrambled up the steps. Not wearing heels had been a wise move. I ascended with relative ease. The police had undoubtedly arrived by now. They and the rest of the security guards would be in the lobby and on the streets surrounding the building. No one would guess the perpetrator of all this chaos would head to the roof. Who in their right mind would do so? I didn't stop running until I actually tasted fresh air. I tightened the straps of my briefcase and my handbag, then used my belt to secure them even tighter to my abdomen. My research had told me the east side of the building would provide an easier jump. I checked my bags again to ensure they were securely fastened. Then I hustled. I rounded the elevator bank and stopped, cold. It felt as though I'd walked into a freezer naked. I shivered, but couldn't take another step as I gazed ahead at Miss Pruden, gazing back at me. "The police are the least of your worries," she said. "Who's worried?" I asked. Pruden was unexpected, but she didn't scare me, though my chattering teeth no doubt gave her the contrary impression. "I just took out a menace to society." I tilted my trembling head backward and cast my eyes in the direction of the sun. I stopped shivering. Guess I'm about to take out another one. I lowered my head and met her eyes. Pruden approached. You've interfered with a federal investigation, bitch. I had goosebumps. My extremities were tingling. I may have been able to move my arms or legs, but I didn't. I knew you weren't here to get hired, Pruden continued. But I knew you were here for some kind of job. I tried to research you, tried to figure out who you're with. I initially assumed the IAI, but no, you're too sophisticated. My best guess? You're one of those archangel bitches. The tingling had subsided, but I still didn't move, even as Pruden got within 10 feet of me. I know you won't tell me, I said, so I won't bother asking. But whoever you're with, they were moving too slowly. As far as I'm concerned, you're aiding and abetting the enemy. Dumb bitch. You have no idea how federal investigations work. I know how my investigations work, I said, and I know what it means for one woman to repeatedly call another a bitch. We were now no more than 5 feet from one another, staring eye to eye. There were many different types of virus carriers, and among those were many different threat levels. What kind of medication or drugs did Pruden take? What type of training had she undergone? Did she have a mentor? If so, how vicious and sadistic was she? I hadn't done the research on her that she tried to do on me, and I couldn't even guess what cult or clique she'd come from. That ice light method she used was new to me, but I did know one thing. She was brazen or stupid enough to get this close, look me in the eye, and leave her ears uncovered. You have a problem with the word bitch? Pruden said. Tough. I call him like I see him. So do I. I dilated my pupils and released a piercing wail to accompany the spillage of light I'd gathered from the sun. The woman tumbled backward, as if hit by a water cannon. I didn't wait to see her try to get to her feet. I ran, gathering speed as I neared the edge of the roof, then leaped off. While airborne, my specially designed dress and matching jacket reconfigured slightly and combined with my electromagnetic talents to provide enough lift for me to glide to the next building, 11 stories tall. I sprinted across the roof and jumped off the next edge, using the same talents to glide across to the roof of a building roughly the same size. I ran and jumped off the ledge once more, this time letting myself miss the roof and fall a couple of stories down, landing relatively unscathed on the fire escape. Now, safely out of sight of the city's flying drones and all the surrounding buildings' cameras, I hustled down the stairs as I monitored my surroundings and modified the appearance of my face, skin tone, and clothes. I retrieved the malodorous perfume from my purse and sprayed it strategically. I then retrieved a bottle of brown and black powder and applied it deftly to my clothes. By the time I hit the ground, Jacqueline May had been put to rest. Walking in her place was a reeking, dirty, wrinkly old bag lady who shuffled along from trash can to trash can. I knew all the drones, cameras, and humans around me would be all too willing to turn a blind eye to what I'd become.